Some men throw parades to hide what they've broken. Others just stand back, and let the truth speak. It was supposed to be his moment. Donald Trump, standing under a sky littered with red, white, and blue confetti. A spectacle choreographed down to the last fake cheer. The flags. The stage. The carefully selected crowd, roaring on cue. He had finally signed what he called the biggest bill of its kind ever, a piece of legislation so bloated, so cruel, and so self-serving that even his staff looked uneasy in their applause. Yet he smiled. A forced, contorted grin stretched over a face that couldn't quite mask the fury underneath. He had gotten everything he wanted, the cameras, the headlines, the desperate clapping of enablers, and still, something gnawed at him. Because deep down, even he knew what the country was thinking. This wasn't a victory. This was a betrayal wrapped in bunting. The bill was loathed, not disliked, not misunderstood, despised. By the very people he claimed to fight for. Seniors. Veterans. Single parents. Children. Small business owners. Communities already hanging by a thread. And what did this bill do? It yanked the thread. Healthcare slashed. Food support gutted. Medicaid buried under billionaire tax breaks. And Trump, knowing this, didn't even bother to pretend he cared. He called it historic. He called it beautiful. He called it popular. He lied. Openly. Repeatedly. But even in his usual fog of bluster, he couldn't bring himself to say the one thing he desperately wanted to believe. That this bill made him admired. Because it didn't. It made him hated. And then, as if summoned by fate, the one voice he couldn't drown out, spoke. Barack Obama didn't hold a rally. He didn't shout. He didn't insult. He simply posted a statement, just a few calm, measured words. But they landed like a thunderclap. Now, we're going to break this story wide open. What this bill really did. Why the public recoiled from it. And how one quiet message from a former president sent Donald Trump spiraling into a meltdown for the ages. This isn't just about policy. It's about truth. It's about shame. And it's about a man who, no matter how many flags he stands under, still can't outrun the shadow of the one who came before him. If you looked only at the flags, the fireworks, and the cameras, you might have thought history was being made. But if you listened closely, you could hear a country holding its breath. The South Lawn was dressed for television. Rows of flags lined the stage like props in a political stage play. The podium gleamed under the July sun. Trump stood before a crowd of loyalists carefully curated for the camera, senators, donors, sycophants. They had rehearsed their lines. They knew when to clap, when to nod, when to cheer. A banner behind him declared victory. Promises made, promises kept. But what had been delivered was something else entirely. Not reform. Not relief. A catastrophe wearing a red tie. Trump stood tall, thumbs up, lips curled into that signature smirk he wore like armor. Cameras clicked. Applause thundered. A light breeze carried confetti across the lawn like it was a game show finale. It was all very, on brand. And yet, he couldn't fake it completely. Behind his grin was something raw. Not joy. Not triumph. But rage. Because for all the pomp and spectacle, he knew something wasn't landing. Not with the press. Not with the polls. And certainly not with the people. The truth was already leaking out. The louder the celebration, the deeper the shame it tried to drown. News outlets were already calling it what it was, the most unpopular bill in modern American history. According to data compiled by Georgetown political scientist Christopher Warshaw, only one other piece of legislation had sunk lower in public opinion, and that too had Trump's name on it, his failed 2017 attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. This new law wasn't just unpopular. It was radioactive. More toxic than the 2008 bank bailout. More despised than George W. Bush's war appropriations. Less trusted than anything passed since 1990. Why? Because it didn't hide what it was. It gutted Medicaid. It slashed food assistance. It handed billions in tax breaks to the ultra-rich. And it did all of that at breakneck speed, not because the people wanted it, but because Trump wanted a win before July 4th. He wanted headlines. He got headlines. But not the ones he expected. Americans saw through the facade. Parents sat at kitchen tables doing the math on insulin. Seniors skipped groceries to afford their prescriptions. Children in rural towns were left wondering if the clinic that treated them would still be open next week. The suffering wasn't abstract. It was specific. And immediate. But Trump didn't talk about that. He rambled about the biggest bill ever. He barked about historic victories. He claimed it was incredibly popular. And yet, even in the haze of self-congratulation, something broke through. His voice cracked. His posture slipped. And the lie couldn't quite hold. Because deep down, he knew. And worse, he knew that we knew. He tried to call it a revolution. But it felt more like a robbery. And just when it seemed he might escape the day with his illusion intact, the blow came from the only man alive who could land it. It wasn't passed in secret. It wasn't hidden behind closed doors. And yet, when it became law, millions of Americans felt as if they'd been blindsided by a wrecking ball they saw coming in slow motion. The ink wasn't even dry. Trump had just signed it into law, pen in hand, smile strained, cameras snapping like applause machines, and already the numbers were telling the story he didn't want to hear. The legislation, officially titled the American Recovery and Tax Equity Act, had been sold as a triumph. But outside the Beltway echo chamber, it was being called something else, a betrayal, a catastrophe, a blueprint for cruelty. Polls didn't trickle in, they erupted. A national survey showed the bill underwater by 23 points. In swing states, the disapproval was even sharper. In red states, the anxiety was palpable. This wasn't a partisan divide, it was a moral chasm. Georgetown's Christopher Warshaw, who compiled historical polling data going back decades, didn't mince words. This is one of the most disliked pieces of legislation in modern congressional history. Worse than Bush's bank bailout. Worse than Trump's own failed 2017 ACA repeal. Even worse, somehow, than the early unpopularity of Obamacare, which was demonized non-stop when it passed in 2009. The deeper researchers dug, the uglier it got. Because unlike other bills, the more Americans learned about this one, the more they hated it. It takes real political skill to propose a law so toxic that even the beneficiaries can't defend it with a straight face. Here's what was actually in the bill. Over 17 million Americans stood to lose healthcare access, mostly from Medicaid cuts, especially in already vulnerable rural and low-income areas. Nearly $1 trillion was being rerouted from public safety nets into corporate tax breaks and capital gains relief for the ultra-wealthy. SNAP benefits, the supplemental food program for low-income families, were slashed, forcing parents to choose between medicine and meals. Funding for programs serving disabled children, veterans, and the elderly was gutted or frozen. Community health clinics in underserved regions were stripped of federal support, accelerating closures across the country. And why? Not to balance the budget. Not to respond to crisis. But to fund tax cuts for those already swimming in privilege. It was redistribution all right, just in reverse. The White House tried to call it pro-growth. Economists called it a ticking bomb. Meanwhile, Trump paraded through July as if he'd signed the Declaration of Independence itself. At press conferences, he gushed. This is the biggest, most beautiful bill ever passed. But when asked about how it would help ordinary Americans, he fumbled, pivoted, and ultimately declared. People are going to realize how popular it is once they see the success. Success. Hospitals were already drafting closure notices. Parents were already rationing insulin. Elderly couples were skipping meals to pay electric bills. There were no confetti cannons in places like Flint or rural Arkansas. And behind the curtain, even Republicans were wincing. Scott Jennings, a conservative commentator, looked pale on CNN as he tried to spin it. He couldn't. Lisa Murkowski apologized to voters. Josh Hawley stumbled over talking points and resorted to fear-mongering about lazy Americans and illegal aliens just to distract from the brutal math. There was no escaping it. The legislation didn't just fail to help people. It actively harmed them. And still, Trump cheered. He smirked in front of a wall of flags. He accepted applause from people who knew better. He basked in artificial praise like a man clapping for himself in an empty stadium. And that's when Obama spoke. Just a few lines. Just a quiet statement. But it cut through the noise like a blade. Sometimes, all it takes to undo a man is a single sentence, especially when it reminds him of everything he'll never be. Trump had orchestrated the show. The flags. The speech. The crowd that clapped on command. He strutted across the White House lawn like a king returning from battle, triumphant in the war he imagined he'd won. He waved. He posed. He bathed in the flashbulbs like they could baptize him in legitimacy. But somewhere, beneath the hairspray and bravado, he was twitching. He had seen the polling. He had read the headlines, even if he pretended not to. He knew what his own advisors whispered behind closed doors. And he could feel it, that cold slither of public contempt crawling up his spine. Still, he played the part. He declared, "Has anyone ever had a better 2 weeks?" He grinned like a game show host. He begged for someone, anyone, to clap louder. And then, Barack Obama posted. It was short. Elegant. Measured. No hashtags. No photos. No petty digs. Just this. Independence Day is a reminder that America is not the project of any one person. The most powerful word in our democracy is we. We the people. We shall overcome. Yes, we can. That was it. No names. No insults. No mention of Trump at all. And yet, it hit like a hammer. Because the man who had just spent hours trying to bend the idea of America around his ego had been quietly reminded that this nation wasn't built for the glorification of a single man, but for the empowerment of many. Obama didn't need to yell. He didn't need to say Trump's name. He didn't need to wave a flag or stage a rally. He simply invoked dignity. And Trump cracked. There's nothing more dangerous to a narcissist than someone who leads without needing to be seen. Trump spiraled. In the days that followed Obama's post, he lashed out from the podium, desperate to reclaim the narrative. He hurled insults at Democrats. He spewed anti-Semitic tropes in front of veterans. He bragged about a tremendous 2 weeks while protests erupted in over 50 cities. He boasted about popularity while polls showed a nosedive. Even George W. Bush joined Obama, releasing a rare statement condemning Trump's decision to gut funding for global AIDS relief, an initiative that had saved over 25 million lives. Is it in our national interest that 25 million people who would have died now live? Bush asked. I think it is, and so do you. Two former presidents. Opposite parties. United, not by politics, but by something Trump would never understand, service. And all the while, Trump watched from his digital bunker. He scrolled. He fumed. He tweeted in all caps. But it was too late. Obama had done more with a paragraph than Trump could with a parade. He reminded the country of what leadership sounds like. What grace feels like. What America, at its best, still could be. And in that moment, Trump wasn't the president. He was the man left behind. When the cameras faded, and the confetti settled into the lawn, all that remained was a signature on a bill America didn't want, and a legacy unraveling at the seams. The headlines called it a victory. But the people knew better. Because they'd heard the truth. And it came not in a
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that move the world. Thanks for watching.